Welcome back to Summer Pond, Part 3. I'm Karen Alari, and we're working on finishing up this little painting of a summer meadow and a pond and some beautiful trees in the foreground, midground, and background. So what I've just finished doing is restating some of the dark areas of this focal point tree. And remember, when you're creating your focal point, one of the ways you can draw attention to it is to have that area contain the darkest darks and the lightest lights in the painting. Another way is for that area to have the most detail and the most chromatic color, in other words, most vivid color, or any combination of those things really. So I'm putting back in the light side of these branches. There's a little light on this midground tree back there too. This is the tree that I kind of made up because I felt that the composition needed something with a little more weight on that side. You notice I use my liner brush here. It's a very thin, long brush. They're also called rigger brushes, and it's a very useful tool, I feel, for just creating little wispy bits of twigs and branches and some movement generally in foreground grassy areas, especially those little flicking motions. You just have to be very careful to hold the brush very lightly and keep it very loose and active, and don't crunch down on it. Don't draw with it. Paint with it. So now I've gone back to my small round brush and some of my leafy shadow color. It's just sort of a grayed down bluish green color, and I'm placing some of this shadow back in. I like to work in this method of layer on layer, some light, some dark, going back and forth until I feel like it's the right value and in right shape, and it's just sort of a trial and error method really, but it's also a very forgiving method. So you don't have to worry about being precious or worrying that you're gonna ruin it with one stroke of your paintbrush, because you can always fix it, and that makes for a much more pleasant painting experience. You can just relax and enjoy the process. You notice as I went back further into the painting, I lightened that color up a little bit. So as you move back, your darks are going to get a little lighter, and they're also going to get a little cooler or a little bluer. That's that atmospheric perspective coming into play. So I'm mixing up a pinkish, corally light color, and then added some blue to the other side to gray it down. So I kind of have a light and a dark in that color in that little pile. So what I'm doing is I picked up my painting in order to more easily just kind of roll in this really loose foreground. My goal here is to keep it very loose and just give an impression of these grasses and weeds and flowers in the foreground. If you remember in our reference photo, the foreground was really kind of a little road, and it looked like they just come in with some machinery and cut it down and cut the bushes around this tree, and I didn't want it to have that sort of an unnatural feel. So instead I'm just putting in some loose grasses similar to what are in the background, and just trying to make those look like they're those same kind of foliage as in the foreground. So I mixed up a little green, and again I'm getting one thing to think about as you're painting is getting those edges. It's frustrating to me when I get to the end of a painting and I haven't painted all the way to the edge, and then I go and to frame it in one of the styles of frame I use is a floater frame where the edges are exposed. So I don't want to see those little bits of white canvas. I paint the sides of the canvas black, and so as I'm painting, it's just something to think about, to make sure you paint all the way around the edge. Coming back with a shadow color. This is really a a shadow color of those yellow flowers. So it's started with that quinacridone gold and darkened it down with some Alizarin Crimson, and now I'm making it more yellow, some more cadmium yellow, some more white, and putting on that next layer, which is the lighter layer of these wild flowers or weeds. And again, I'm not going to paint any flower shape. I don't want this to be a focal point. It's as if you see this area out of your peripheral vision because you're really focusing on the tree. So you don't want to put too much detail in here or your eyes are going to automatically focus there. But I do want it to have some edges, and that will give it some interest. It is in the foreground, so you would have edges. It wouldn't all just be soft. You would have some hard edges. So I'm going in with a light bluish color. I'm using my Ultramarine Blue and white. Again, whenever you have a flat surface, you're going to have those little sparkles of light reflecting from the sky, and that also really integrates your painting, brings the sky into the rest of your painting to have those little bits of sky color. And right there where it's flat, that's kind of a flat ground area, then you're going to see more of the blue sky reflection. And little touches of that on the leaves will give the leaves a little bit of a sparkle. You can do these little highlights in both a warm highlight color and this cool kind of sky reflection color. I find the combination of those seems to work out well. Okay, came back with some shadowy ground color to put back under there, real loosely, creating that little loose foreground area. Again, I don't have a particular reference I'm using for this area, so I'm just looking at the painting, and what I do is if something stands out and I look at the painting and my eye is drawn to it, then I know that needs a little more work or adjustment. Came back in and lightened up that where the shadow area is going into the light, lightening up that little line, making it more irregular. Now I'm taking that same light color. As you remember, I put those shadows or those highlights in on the tree in a very white color, and now I'm coming back with that more tannish, got some quinacridone gold in it, because the light side of a trunk would not very likely be white. It's gonna have a little bit of color to it. Here I'm adding some of that same color also of kind of dried grasses back in the midground. Now I've come back in with a more chromatic green. Remember, that's another thing. As you come forward, your colors are going to become more vivid, especially in your focal point area. So I've come back in with a green that doesn't have a lot of white in it. It's not grayed down very much. First a darker version of that, and then I'll come back with a lighter version of that, just having added some white and some cad yellow. Using that very light rolling method, as the layers build up on this tree, your touch needs to get lighter and lighter. And there I'm just a little water on my paper towel to I had obscured that little lit tree trunk there that I didn't want to, so you can come back in and just take a little damp paper towel and wipe it out while it's still wet. some of this green down in the shadowed grasses as well. This is a kind of a shadowy green color because its value is darker. Even though it was more chromatic in color than our other shadow colors, it's still in the same value range, so it's still going to stay in the shadow. And now with the lighter version of that again. I'm just looking at these edges, on these very edges of the tree. That's where you're going to see a little bit of a hint of leaves and the shapes of the leaves. I'm not going to draw individual leaves, but the tree is just going to have along the outline of some little tiny leafy shapes. And then as I move to the background, I got a little grayer, a little bluer with that color, and I'll also blend those out so they stay soft and in the background. Okay, we're almost done. I think at this point I'm going to do a few little highlights and finish up this foreground area, and then the next step is to set it aside a couple days and come back and look at it with fresh eyes, do a little critiquing, and see where I want to go with the painting at this point. Okay, here we are with our painting so far, and now it's time to do a little evaluating. It's always good to put your painting aside for a day or two and then come back to it with fresh eyes, and it makes it easier to see the things you want to change and the things that are working well. In general, I'm pretty happy with this painting. There's a couple of small areas I want to fix. Over here, I see that there should be some shadow here on this side of the tree, this tree here, to match the other shadows and the direction that the light is going. I'll also probably come in and alter this area a little bit. This whole area with the contrast of dark and light is just jumping out and capturing my eye, and it's a very incidental area, so I'll probably lower the contrast here so that that's not quite so obvious. I'm liking the way the shadow is going here with the tree. It might be a little bit dark, but I think that I like that that contrast and that element. I think is interesting to me, so I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it. The only thing I'm noticing that I probably don't like is how the length of this shadow is almost the same length as here the pond is here. So I'm probably either going to have to lengthen this pond out clear over to here, or possibly just shorten it a little bit. I think I might shorten it a little bit. I also don't like that I just have a tiny bit of the pond over here. I think I'll go ahead and enlarge this side of the pond just a little bit so it doesn't look like one little spot. The only other thing that I'm seeing that's bothering me a little bit is just the thickness of the foliage here in the tree. I think I need to come in with a few spots where you can see the pond through and see a little more, see the sky in the background through the tree. It seems a little bit heavy to me. Beyond that, I just have some areas right over here on the edge. This is too sharp and distinctive a line. I need to blend that out a little bit more so that's not a hard edge there, because it's back in the background and it's off to the edge of the painting, and it's not really something that I need that to be that hard edged. I'm making up the water here. As you remember in the reference photo, this was a dry area that had water in it in the winter, but it was dried now. And I'm not sure that I'm happy with this being almost the same color all the way through. I think I need to vary the color and the value in the water a little bit so that it lays down a little bit more, and possibly add a little bit more dark around the edges. This is a fairly shallow pond, so I think I would right along the edges see more of the ground underneath the water. So I'm probably going to darken around the edges a little bit more to make that water seem a little more believable. But besides that, I'm really liking the way this front foliage is working. I think it's interesting without being too detailed. Gives you just a feeling of weeds and grasses growing randomly and naturally. So I think that's all the things I'm going to do to fix this little painting, and then we'll be done. Okay, so starting in with our fixes here, and the first thing I'm working on is adding that little shadow back to the tree, because remember our light source is on the left hand side, so we need shadows to be consistent in order for the eye to believe that. Just working with some of my dark color there to make that shadow, and then now going back in with a sort of a peachy grayed down color. It's kind of going to be like those foreground grasses, only grayer because it's further back in the distance. Adding a little white to my shadow color, taking out that very strong dark shadow that was under that tree, again to keep it in the right place in the distance. You gotta keep those darks and lights consistent. Here's this little area where I had some sharp edges on the ground, and that was drawing the eye to that area, which is right on the edge of the canvas, so we're fixing that one by just scumbling in some greens and some shadow colors. Going with a light bluish color here now. Going back to that sky color, which is where we're going to get those reflections on the pond. Working on making the colors in the pond a little more varied, so it's just not all one flat color. Altering the shape of that pond a little bit with the greens, so it isn't quite as long, doesn't finish right before the same part where the shadow of the tree finished. And now adding a little more pond onto the left hand side. It's the wonderful thing about acrylics, you can make these changes and fix them all the way whenever you want to, and nothing's ruined. Adding they would be sky holes, but these are pond holes we're adding back into our tree to lighten it up a little bit, make that foliage not quite so dense. By just adding back little areas where the pond is peeking through. All these little final touches that it take a while to think about, but it's kind of amazing how a few little things and all of a sudden you can be much happier with your painting if you take that time and reevaluate it. Now adding some actual sky holes into the top of the tree to make it a little more airy up there as well. Adding some dark ground into the pond by taking that tannish color and adding some more blue to it, which will give me a little more darker and a little cooler color. And then coming back, lightening it up again, adding some red to warm it up, give it almost a pinky color in the sand along the edge there. I hope you're enjoying these videos. and that you join me on my website, paintwithkarenalari.com. I'd have classrooms and a place for you to get critiques on your own work, and it's just a little sharing website that I have going, and members from all over the world sharing their paintings and in their process of learning to paint, and giving each other comments and critiques. Finishing up this bank that I wanted to change up a little bit, adding some lights back in. It's such a fun process, this little painting. Many fun hours I've spent with it, and I hope you're enjoying the process as well, and that you'll pick up your paintbrush and give it a try. If not with this particular scene, just with any scene that's around your home that you love. I carry my camera with me just about everywhere I go, so when I'm struck by a scene like this, I can snap a few photos of it and take it home to work on when the weather starts getting more rainy and cold and can't go outside anymore. Can always work on things in the studio. Adding back in a little light on those background trees to sparkle them up, but I didn't want too much, so I've come back in and I'm blending out those edges again. I'm going to keep the edges in the foreground tree the sharpest, and the ones further back softer and looser, so that those trees will stay back in the background. Holding my brush very lightly and just creating organic shapes. If your tree starts feeling a little flat, like it's two-dimensional, that's when you need to add a little bit more light to bring part of it forward. A little more blued out area back there. And then a few holes in that tree there where you would see that background color of the grasses through it. It's all a give and take. Using a little tiny brush here. I change brushes a lot depending on what it is I'm trying to accomplish, and here I'm just want little final touches, so I have a little tiny brush that I'm using. It's a synthetic brush, and it's good for getting into tight places. And now I've moved back to my small round brush just to add a little more interest, just a few of these edges in the front. I did want to mention that a lot of my original paintings are available in my Etsy shop. Etsy is an online marketplace where you can buy things, ETSY, Etsy.com, and just search for Karen Alari, and you can see all the paintings that I have available for purchase. And this one will be there. We are about finished. A few final finishing touches. I thank you for joining me today in this little video painting adventure. And now's the time to break out your paints and pick up your paintbrush and start your own adventure. Well, that's it for this little painting today. So until we meet again in the next video, take care and happy painting!